Hello, welcome to this episode of the Academy. Today we're going to pick up Sun Tzu's Art of War, Chapter 3. We're going to go through sentences 8 through 10. There's a little bit here that applies to the tabletop, but it takes a little bit of reading to kind of pull that out, so I'm going to help us do that. So I'm just going to get right into it. I'll read the three sentences together. I think they should be taken as a whole. We'll talk through and figure it all out. So, starting with sentence 8. It is the rule in war, if our forces are 10 to the enemy's 1, to surround him. If 5 to 1, attack him. If twice as numerous, to divide our army into 2. If equally matched, this is sentence 9, we can offer battle. If slightly inferior in numbers, we can avoid the enemy. If quite unequal in every way, we can flee from him. Hence, sentence 10, though an obstinate fight may be made by a small force, in the end it must be captured by the larger force. Okay, so let's unpack those three sentences. What we're talking about here is what you do, how you manage situations where you are outnumbered, or if hopefully outnumber your opponent. Okay, and I want to end up talking a little bit about that last sentence, the ultimate fate of a small force versus a large force. This maybe, since we're covering three separate sentences, this one may be a little bit longer as a video, but it's still, we're going to keep it short. Again, with respect to Sun Tzu's brevity and his concise language he uses. So, the key here is if you're 10 to 1 odds, you want to surround the enemy. Now, this is rarely ever going to be the case on the tabletop. Okay, but again, you have enough resources to surround your opponent if you have that vast capacity of equally or outnumbering them by 10 to 1. The 5 to 1, you can attack him. Now notice, 5 to 1. In normal military science, you have to expect it takes at least 2 to 1, maybe 3 to 1 to dislodge a defender, and much more if they're in a fortified position. So here, 5 to 1, he's not far off. Even with the modern capabilities we have, we're still looking 2 to 3 times numerical or combat capability advantage. So it's still good advice. So if twice as numerous, divide your army into 2. So let's take those two. Let's do 5 to 1 and let's do 2 to 1. The concept I'm going to share with you, 5 to 1 here, really means focus your combat units. Make as many opportunities as possible for you to concentrate your force against your larger portion of your force against smaller portions of his, either through stringing out your opponent's battle line and concentrating your forces on one side, or threatening your opponent on one part of the table, tying down certain units, while the bulk of your army deals with some other on the other half of the table. Okay, that's one way to do that. Now, in that example, that second example, that speaks to if twice as numerous, divide your army into 2. You have an A group and a B group. Both are involved in attack. You've got the initial force of equal number to engage and hold the enemy in position. The second is to come at from flank or rear to apply, again, equal numbers to the opponent and crush them. That's a common tactic, common good tactic in the past and even in modern day. So on the tabletop, it's kind of the same thing. If you can get in a situation like early in the game when your opponent has most of his stuff in reserve, try to outmaneuver your opponent to outflank and put him in a position where you're concentrating your fire on a smaller portion of his force, so that if his reserves do come in, they're not coming in against, they're not able to reinforce that strong point because the strong point's been reduced somewhat. So that's how I kind of offer my interpretation for those two. That one sentence, then number 8. With number 9, we're talking about if you're equal in number, you can offer battle. So yes, if you have at least as much as your opponent, you can go ahead and engage in battle. Now that's actually most of the war games we fight. We play balanced games, so to speak, and it's legitimate. Okay, it's not ideal, but you have to then make the tactical situation appropriate so you get local advantages to win. Now here's the key. If slightly inferior in numbers, or combat capability, you want to avoid the enemy. That's the term he uses. What he's saying there is not basically stay away from them. It's avoid their strength. You can kind of harass them with guerrilla tactics, if you will. Make them don't engage head on, because smaller force to a larger force, you're going into a losing proposition. But harass them from a distance. Keep your distance. Don't let him engage with everything he can. You really have to play that one carefully, because you don't want to engage him. You want to avoid that engagement, but you still want to harass him. And then finally, if you're unequal in every way, you're significantly outnumbered, or you're low on ammunition, you just aren't able to stand up, meet the opponent with an equal combat capability, you simply flee. You avoid contact. Now that doesn't apply on the tabletop, unless there are rules within your scenario or your game system that allow you to quit the field, and there are some points involved. Maybe you don't lose it. Maybe you don't. Let's say you give up points by having a unit defeated or destroyed, but you give up fewer points if it leaves the field intact. If you can quit the field, that's an option, and that's how you could do it. If it's written in the scenario or the game system itself, when you're significantly outnumbered or outclassed, quitting the field is your best option. Okay. Now, the last comment is, hence, though an obstinate fight may be made by a small force, in the end, it must be captured by the larger force. Now, this really is true almost everywhere you can go. If you think about it, we'll use the Battle of the Bulge. I think that's a very good example here, simply because it seems to fly in the face of this. We had the small elements of a couple divisions, primarily the 101st Airborne, but there were other elements in the area, held up in the town of Bastogne in Belgium, facing essentially the might of the Wehrmacht and the SS units that came up. And basically, they had to hold this crossroads. Bastogne was not an important town, except that it was a good hub, if you will. All the roads led to Bastogne almost, and so that was a great point for either side to hold, because it made transportation much more possible, more easy throughout the area. Okay, so the U.S. was not going to give it up. They held on. Germans ended up surrounding it. They had numerical superiority, combat capability superiority. Bastogne was low on ammunition, pinned in, didn't have the armor capability that the Germans had. And of course, attrition was just going to make that worse, because again, a stubborn fight. They're going to take losses and eventually wear them down. Now, if it wasn't for the fact that the airdrops were occurring, the resupply was happening, and there was good discipline on the force, or on the ground, the troops that were wounded made sure the leadership made sure that the weapons and ammunition were taken from those, scavenged from the dead, and hoarded so that they could be used by anyone who's still up and combat capable. Now, without those airdrops, there's no way that the units locked up in that could have had the ammunition, medical supplies, and food to continue a protracted engagement. So they were able to hold out long enough for the Germans to kind of basically batter themselves up against the rocks, and the Third Army to come in and kind of relieve them. I guess when you look at it from the perspective of the defenders of Bastogne, they weren't rescued. They were finally joined by the rest of the U.S. forces. So they had good morale, but the idea was that they were not a sure thing there, except that they had the airdrops happening. Now, some of those airdrops did fall into enemy hands, but a large portion, fortunately, did fall in the city and were used by those troops to keep them supplied so they could actually hold out against the overwhelming force. Okay, so you will have examples of that. So when you find situations where a small force holds out against all odds, kind of thing, ignore the storybooks. Just look at real history. Ask yourself the questions of why were they able to hold off? The Spartans, 300 Spartans, and the 7,000 Greeks were not. Eventually, the Persians were able to get around them and whittle them down, and in the end, take them. Okay, so every small force will eventually get destroyed. Again, this is assuming land contact. We're not talking about bombardment and aerial bombing at all. We're talking about land troops versus land troops. Okay. All right, so that's what we're talking about. Those are the 3 sentences we're going to cover in this video. Nice and simple, how it applies to the tabletop. Again, sit back, take some notes. Again, if you have your own copy, take a look at these 3 sentences and see what you can glean from them. Hopefully I've kind of opened your eyes to some possibilities and how they could apply to the tabletop, and maybe you can find others. So anyway, thanks for sticking with me. Share, like, subscribe, and let me know what you think. And again, offer suggestions in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.